Well, thank you. It's great to see so many of you out here tonight to discuss this most important, age-old and timeless question of, is God necessary to live a life of value, meaning and purpose? Now, before we begin, I'm going to just spend a few minutes to define our terms that we're going to be using this evening, because it's very important that we know what actually are we discussing. What do we mean by those terms, value, meaning and purpose? So let's start with value then. Well, value can be taken in one of two ways. It could be taken as the proposition that the positive moral value of some actions is greater than some other actions. It could also be taken to mean that humans are endowed with intrinsic moral value and worth. What about purpose and meaning? How can we understand those terms this evening? Well, purposes can be cosmic, and by that I mean ultimate and transcendent, or they can be local, such as my purpose in life is to pursue a family, to pursue a career, and so forth. Now, for the purpose of our discussion this evening, I'm going to be talking about cosmic purpose and meaning. That is ultimate and transcendent purpose and meaning. I'm going to say from the outset that I'm assuming that the question of our debate this evening is not a stupid question. If we're simply here to discuss can you invent your own personal subjective meaning and purpose for your life? Well, that can be granted readily. I grant that quickly. The question, rather, that is more interesting is, can atheism provide us with a rational justification for asserting that there can be objective purpose and meaning to our lives? So, what are our contentions this evening? I'm going to put forward 5 basic contentions, and my colleague and I will be discussing those 5 basic contentions over the course of our presentations this evening. 1. Atheism cannot properly ground any notion of intrinsic moral value. 2. Atheism cannot provide justification for objective moral norms and values. 3. Atheism cannot provide justification for objective meaning and purpose. 4. Only by embracing the truth of the gospel can we actually fulfill the objectively prescribed purpose for our lives. And 5. A world in which the search for meaning is near universal is itself a clue to the existence of God. So let's then deal with the first of those, which is the topic of value. Now, I'm going to suggest that objective moral norms and values cannot be grounded apart from God, apart from a creator. Now, there are 2 senses in which something can be considered good. Something can be good in a pragmatic sense, that which is the most effective means for obtaining some desired outcome. So, for example, if we desire to eat an ice cream cone, without getting ice cream on our clothes, it is good to start eating from the top of the cone rather than the bottom. This kind of goodness is judged by something's utility. It is considered good because it works well, and the human subject values the fact that it works well. We might call this kind of goodness pragmatic goodness. Secondly, something can also be good in the sense that it has intrinsic moral virtue or character. We might call this kind of goodness moral goodness. This is the kind of goodness moral philosophers have in mind when they talk about objective morality. For example, it's good to save someone from drowning. This kind of goodness is judged by the intrinsic moral character of the act itself, rather than its utility. Indeed, risking one's life to save a stranger has little utility for the rescuer, but great moral virtue nonetheless. This sort of goodness is not determined by what we desire or the value we attach to the outcome, but is rooted in the moral character of the act itself, wholly independent of what the human may think about it. Now, to say that a moral value is objective is to say its truth value does not depend on any human knower. For instance, to say that killing Jews simply because of their ethnicity is immoral in an objective sense is to say that killing Jews is wrong, whether anyone believes it or not. If Hitler had won the war, the Second World War, and eliminated everyone that thought that the Holocaust was immoral, such that everyone now believed it was moral, it would still, in fact, be immoral. So, I'm going to contend then that objective moral norms and values sit far more comfortably, sit far better at home within a theistic universe than in a non-theistic universe. Now let's come to the second way that the concept of value could be taken. Now I want to ask my humanist friends who are with us tonight to address this question, and I'm hoping that they can help me out with this in the rebuttal period. Is this child intrinsically morally valuable? And if they say that it is intrinsically morally valuable, my next question is why? Can you ground that within your worldview? I would contend that it cannot be grounded within an atheistic, humanistic paradigm. My next question I want to ask our humanist friends this evening is which of these on the screen here has the greatest intrinsic moral value? This human baby we see on the left, or the slug we see on the right? Which has the greater intrinsic moral value? What is the metric that we are using to measure intrinsic moral value and worth? Are we saying that it's simply cognitive capability, cognitive function that defines moral value and worth? If that is the case, then are we prepared to say this evening that if someone has a stroke and they lose part of their cognitive capability, that they somehow lose part of their intrinsic moral value and worth? I hope that no one will be prepared to say that this evening. But what about the concept of purpose and meaning? Can we ground that properly in a non-theistic worldview? Well, it may come as a surprise, perhaps, to learn that actually this isn't merely a debate that has atheists on one side and theists on the other. In fact, many atheist thinkers over the years have come to the same conclusions on this matter that I have, namely, that purpose and meaning, at least objective purpose and meaning, cannot be properly grounded within the atheistic framework. For example, Richard Dawkins, one of our time's great theologians, or not, in his book, A River Out of Eden, published in 1995, he writes, and I quote, "In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. As that unhappy poet A.E. Housman put it, for nature, heartless, witless nature, will neither know nor care. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music." And so you can see that Dawkins, who is a patron of the British Humanist Association, agrees with the contention that we're putting forward on this side of the debate this evening, namely, that objective purpose and meaning cannot be grounded apart from God. Let's go to another British atheist thinker, British philosopher Julian Baggini. A few years ago, 2012, he published this article in The Guardian, and the title is, "Yes, Life Without God Can Be Bleak. Atheism is about facing up to that." In the article, he says, atheists are quite rightly keen to counter the accusation that life without God cannot be moral. The British Humanist Association, for instance, claims that, quote, "right and wrong can be explained by human nature alone and do not require religious teaching," end quote. But, just as with happiness, there is a need to distinguish the possibility of atheist morality from its inevitable actuality. Anyone who thinks it's easy to ground ethics either hasn't done much moral philosophy or wasn't concentrating when they did. Although morality is arguably just as murky for the religious, at least there is some bedrock belief that gives a reason to believe that morality is real and will prevail. In an atheist universe, morality can be rejected without external sanction at any point and without a clear, compelling reason to believe in its reality. That's exactly what will sometimes happen. So I think it's time we atheists fessed up and admitted that life without God can sometimes be pretty grim. Now, you might ask at this point, well, why do you, Jonathan, think that objective purpose and meaning cannot be grounded in an atheistic worldview? I'm just going to offer you two arguments, and my colleague Nick is going to give us some more arguments when he gets to the podium. So let me just give you my first argument. And I'm going to present this in terms of a logical structure, philosophical syllogism, if you will. My first premise is that either theism is true, theism is the belief that God exists, or naturalism is true, the belief that the natural world is all that there is, or non-naturalistic atheism is true. Believe it or not, there are actually non-naturalistic forms of atheism, such as a view called moral Platonism, which maintains that there are these abstract entities which exist in some Platonic realm. This is a concept of the Greek philosopher Plato. And that objective morality and purpose and meaning can be grounded in that sort of system. My second premise is that a naturalistic universe is one in which there is truly no objective meaning or purpose. On atheism, the universe is headed towards a heat death in which the universe has evolved to a state of no thermodynamic free energy, and therefore can no longer sustain processes that increase entropy. This means that temperature differences or other processes may no longer be exploited to perform work. On naturalistic atheism, there is no objective meaning or purpose baked into the fabric of the universe. Indeed, I contend that the only two viable sources for objective human values is a personal God whose very nature is good, or objects in some Platonic realm on an atheistic system. So my third premise is that non-naturalistic versions of atheism, such as moral Platonism, suffer from many problems that make them really implausible. Now, because of the constraints of time this evening, I'm not going to discuss this in my opening statement. However, if we need to later on in the rebuttal, I'm happy to get into some of the problems and deficiencies of that view. My fourth premise is there is nothing about generic theism per se that makes objective meaning or purpose unlikely. And therefore, the conclusion that follows from the premises that therefore the existence of objective meaning and purpose points in the direction of theism. And so I think it's best explained as on a theistic worldview rather than an atheistic worldview. So then let's come to my second argument this evening. This is my first premise. If Christianity is true, then necessarily your purpose is grounded in God. My second premise, if necessarily your purpose is grounded in God, then it's not possible that these two things are true together. One, you have purpose, and two, no God exists. Third premise is that Christianity is true. And the conclusion that therefore follows from the premises that therefore it's not possible that these two things are true together. One, you have purpose, and two, no God exists. So then let's come to defend each of the three premises. Start with the first one. If Christianity is true, then necessarily your purpose is grounded in God. Now, according to the Bible, what is the purpose of humanity? What is the purpose of mankind? Well, we can turn to the Bible and we can look at the book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 12 and verse 13, where Solomon writes, "Now all has been heard, here is the conclusion of the matter. Revere God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of humanity." If then the Bible is true, that is the objective purpose that is prescribed for us. That is the purpose for which we were made. The Westminster Confession encapsulates this truth this way. It says, "Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever." Now, this might sound a bit strange to some of you if you're atheists here tonight, or humanists. God made us to glorify him? God made us to worship him? Has God got an ego problem or something like that? Has he got an overinflated ego? Is he very egotistic and very needy insofar as he needs creatures such as ourselves to worship him and to stroke his ego? Well, C.S. Lewis, who is a very famous British theologian and author, very famous for his Chronicles of Narnia, which you might have read, he addressed this objection that often comes up. He writes, and this is in his reflections on the Psalms, he says, "I think we delight to praise what we enjoy, because the praise not merely expresses, but completes the enjoyment. It is its appointed consummation. It is not out of compliment that lovers keep on telling one another how beautiful they are. The delight is incomplete till it is expressed." He goes on, "It is frustrating to have discovered a new author, and not to be able to tell anyone how good he is. To come suddenly at the turn of the road, upon some mountain valley of unexpected grandeur, and then to have to keep silent because the people with you care for it no more than for a tin can in the ditch, to hear a good joke and find no one to share it with. The Scotch Catechism says that man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. But we shall then know that these are the same thing. Fully to enjoy is to glorify. In commanding us to worship him, God is inviting us to enjoy him. This is the purpose of life according to the Christian worldview. This is the purpose for which each of you individually were made. Then let's come to my second premise. If necessarily your purpose is grounded in God, then it's not possible that these two things are true together. One, you have purpose, and two, know God exists. This should be self-evident, that if indeed it is true that your purpose really is grounded in God, then the two propositions cannot be true together, that you have no purpose, that you have purpose, and that no God exists. So let's come to my third premise, that Christianity is true. But you might ask at this point, well, how can we know that Christianity is true? And this really gets to the heartbeat of why I am a Christian before you this evening. I am not a Christian because it gives my life a sense of meaning and purpose, ultimately. I am not a Christian because it gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling or because I'm afraid of death. I stand before you this evening as one who is a Christian because I value truth. And I am persuaded by the public evidence that Christianity is true. Now, the case for Christianity is cumulative in nature. So if you're looking for a single spectacular piece of evidence that proves Christianity, some silver bullet argument, I am sorry to disappoint you this evening. I contend, however, that the evidence for Christianity, when considered cumulatively, is very, very compelling. Such that I am convinced that the person who is fully informed and doing his best to be fair and objective with the evidence will, in the long run, become persuaded of its truth. Let me just run through a few categories of evidence for Christianity. I'm not going to go into detail because of the constraints of time. However, if you would like to know more about the evidence for Christianity, simply ask about it in the Q&A. I'd be very happy to go into more detail. Or come to speak to me at the end, and I'll be very happy to talk about it further. We have evidences for the New Testament documents being based on substantially reliable testimony of eyewitnesses who were habitually truthful, those things in which we can cross-check them to get right. For example, the category of undesigned coincidences, where you basically have multiple sources of the same event which interlock and dovetail in a way that points to truth. And extra-biblical corroborations, where you have something inside the biblical account which is corroborated or illuminated upon by some extra-biblical source. We also have the evidences for the bodily resurrection of Jesus. I was speaking about this topic in Edinburgh this morning, about the public evidences for the bodily resurrection of Jesus, which I would contend is overwhelming. If indeed the Gospels, as I contend that they are based on substantially trustworthy eyewitness testimony, then we have to take seriously what they say about the nature of the resurrection appearances of Jesus, namely that they were multi-sensory, involving multiple sensory modes, not just sight, but physical touch, group conversations, hearing, etc. And it was extended across 40 days, not just one brief confusing episode. So I think that the evidences for the bodily resurrection of Jesus are very compelling. We also have, I think, very strong evidence, cumulative evidence, for the divine inspiration of Scripture. Some patterns of evidence that point to this, in my opinion, are what I call intricate harmonies. I don't have time to get into that right now. And predictive prophecy. One, you have purpose, and two, no God exists. So now to finish with this. There are three questions of any journey. As I mentioned, I came from Edinburgh this morning for this debate. Three questions that need to be asked. Where am I? Where am I going? And how am I going to get there? The Bible gives us an honest assessment of these three questions in life. Where am I? Where am I going? How am I going to get there? Atheistic humanism is at best vague, subjective, and unaccountable. It lacks purpose and meaning and is based on how we would like it to be. Insofar that humanism tries to affirm objective value, ethics, meaning, and purpose, it draws on borrowed capital. For these notions can only properly be grounded in a transcendent creator. Thanks for your attention.